What if I told you that one of the biggest stars in Hollywood today spent nearly 20 years being broke, rejected, and almost invisible? What if I told you that the man the entire internet calls Daddy Pascal, the guy starring in the MCU and HBO's biggest show, in The Last of Us, once worked as a waiter just to survive? This is the story of Pedro Pascal, and trust me, it's one of the greatest comeback stories Hollywood has ever seen. Our story begins not in Hollywood, but in Santiago, Chile on April 2nd, 1975. His full name? José Pedro Balmaceda Pascal. Yeah, that's a mouthful. We'll get to why he shortened it later. Pedro was born into a family of educated, successful people. His father, José Balmaceda, was a fertility doctor. His mother, Verónica Pascal, was a child psychologist. Smart, accomplished, loving parents. But there was one massive problem. Chile in the mid-1970s was not a safe place to live. The country was under the iron grip of Augusto Pinochet, a military dictator whose regime was responsible for the torture, disappearance, and murder of thousands of Chileans. Anyone who was seen as a threat to the government, intellectuals, doctors, activists, academics, was in danger. Pedro's parents were exactly the kind of people Pinochet's regime targeted. So when Pedro was just a baby, barely 9 months old, his family did something incredibly brave and heartbreaking at the same time. They fled their home country. They sought asylum in several places, eventually making their way to the United States. The family settled first in Orange County, California, and later in San Antonio, Texas. Imagine that. Pedro Pascal, the man who would one day helm the biggest franchise in the galaxy, started his life as a refugee. That's not just background information. That shapes everything about who he is. Growing up in America as a Chilean immigrant wasn't always easy. Pedro was caught between two worlds, the rich Chilean culture his family carried with them and the American world he was trying to fit into. He went to public schools. He was just a regular kid by all accounts. But there was one thing that lit him up from a very young age: movies. His father used to take the family to the cinema every single week. Pedro soaked it all in, the stories, the characters, the emotions on screen. He also went to concerts, Spurs basketball games, all kinds of live events. He was absorbing the world around him like a sponge. By his teenage years, Pedro knew exactly what he wanted to do with his life. He wanted to act. He attended the Orange County School of Arts, one of the best performing arts high schools in California, and then he made the big leap. He moved to New York City and enrolled in NYU's Tisch School of Arts, one of the most prestigious acting programs in the world. It was here, in the halls of NYU, that something life-changing happened. Not a big audition, not a famous director discovering him. He met a fellow student named Sarah Paulson. Yes, that Sarah Paulson, Emmy-winning actress, one of the most respected performers in Hollywood. They became best friends for life. Their friendship would last decades and become one of the most heartwarming bonds in all of showbiz. Pedro graduated in 1997 with his Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. He was ready to take on the world. The world, however, had other plans. Here's where most people would have quit. After graduating from NYU, Pedro Pascal, talented, trained, passionate, could barely get a role. His very first audition was for the 1996 legal thriller Primal Fear, the film that launched Edward Norton's career. Pedro didn't get the part. What followed was nearly 2 decades of struggle. He picked up tiny guest roles on television, shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, NYPD Blue, Touched by an Angel, The Good Wife, Nurse Jackie, Homeland. Blank and you would have missed them. These were the kinds of roles where you don't even get your name in the promotional material. He later admitted that he was unemployed for about 10 years, a staggering admission from someone who would one day be one of the most in-demand actors on earth. To pay his bills, he did what so many aspiring actors do. He became a waiter. Let that sink in. The man who voices the Mandalorian was once bringing you your pasta and asking you if you wanted fresh pepper. But here's what's important. Pedro Pascal never stopped working at his craft. While the TV roles dried up, he threw himself into theater. He joined the prestigious Labyrinth Theater Company in New York. He took on stage productions, sharpened his skills, directed a play in 2008. He performed at the Shakespeare Theater Company. He was putting in the work even when nobody was watching. But just as his early career was finding its footing, something devastating happened. In February 2000, Pedro Pascal's world was shattered. His mother, Verónica Pascal, the woman he adored, the child psychologist who had sacrificed so much for his family, passed away. It was sudden, it was traumatic, and it broke him. Pedro has spoken about his mother with extraordinary tenderness in interviews over the years. He once said, "She was the love of my life. I think of her every day. I live for her, even though she's no longer here, and that makes sense to me." To honor her memory, he made a decision. He would stop using his father's surname, Balmaceda, and instead take his mother's last name, Pascal. He also acknowledged, with a kind of humor that has made him so beloved, Americans had such a hard time pronouncing Balmaceda. But the name change was at its heart a tribute, an act of love. Every time you say the name Pedro Pascal, you're saying his mother's name. And that is everything. By 2013, Pedro Pascal was 38 years old, nearly 20 years in the industry, a handful of forgettable TV credits, a rich theater resume that almost no one outside of New York theater circles knew about. And then the phone rang. He auditioned for a role in a little show called Game of Thrones. The character's name was Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dorne, a charismatic, dangerous, sensual, deeply emotional prince on a mission of vengeance. Pedro got the part. When Season 4 of Game of Thrones premiered in 2014, the world collectively lost their minds over Oberyn. Pedro Pascal was electric on screen. He brought a swagger, a vulnerability, and a ferocity to the role that was impossible to look away from. His death scene, one of the most brutal and shocking ones in a show full of brutal and shocking moments, left audiences absolutely devastated. Overnight, Pedro Pascal became famous. He had been waiting nearly 20 years for this moment, and when it finally came, he was ready. After Game of Thrones, the offers started coming in. In 2015, he landed the lead role of Javier Peña in Netflix's Narcos, the gritty, acclaimed drama about the rise and fall of Pablo Escobar and the DEA agents hunting him down. 2 seasons of brilliant, complex work that cemented his reputation as a serious leading man. Film roles followed. Kingsman: The Golden Circle in 2017, Triple Frontier in 2019 alongside Ben Affleck and Isaac, Wonder Woman 1984 in 2020, where he played the flamboyant villain Maxwell Lord. But then came the role that truly transformed him into a global icon. In 2019, Disney Plus launched its first original series, The Mandalorian, a Star Wars story set in the wild outer reaches of the galaxy. Pedro Pascal was cast as Din Djarin, the Mandalorian, a lone bounty hunter, a warrior of few words, and eventually a father figure to the most beloved creature in the universe, Grogu, Baby Yoda. The world went absolutely insane. The Mandalorian became a cultural phenomenon, and the relationship between Pedro's stoic helmeted bounty hunter and the tiny big-eyed Grogu became one of the most emotionally resonant stories in all of Star Wars. Here was this man who had spent so long in obscurity, now carrying one of the biggest franchises in entertainment history on his shoulders, and he was magnificent. If The Mandalorian made Pedro Pascal a superstar, The Last of Us made him a legend. HBO's 2023 adaptation of the beloved video game cast Pedro Pascal as Joel Miller, a broken, grieving father who is tasked with smuggling a teenage girl named Ellie across a post-apocalyptic America. The show was a masterpiece. Critics called it one of the greatest television series ever made, and that its center was Pedro Pascal delivering what many consider the performance of his career. Joel is a man of immense pain, a man who has lost everything and built walls so high that no one can reach him. And slowly, across 9 episodes, Ellie, played brilliantly by Bella Ramsey, tears those walls down. The finale left audiences weeping around the world. In 2023, Pedro Pascal made history. He became the first Latino actor to receive 3 Emmy nominations in a single year for lead actor in The Last of Us, guest actor for his Saturday Night Live hosting appearance, and narrator for Patagonia, Life on the Edge of the World. He was named one of the Time magazine's 100 most influential people. He hosted Saturday Night Live. The internet dubbed him the internet's daddy, a title he embraced with his trademark self-deprecating humor, joking that it was role-related because he kept playing protective father figures. And then in 2025, he joined the Marvel Cinematic Universe as Reed Richards in the Fantastic Four: First Steps, one of the most anticipated MCU films in years. Pedro Pascal on the poster of a Marvel movie. Not bad for a guy who used to wait tables. So what do we take from the story of Pedro Pascal? A boy born during a dictatorship, a refugee, a struggling actor who waited tables and took tiny TV roles for almost 20 years, a son who lost his mother and named himself after her in tribute, a man who kept going when every sign told him to stop. He didn't become famous at 22, he became famous at 49. And because he had lived so much life by the time the spotlight found him, he had something most young stars don't have: depth, patience, gratitude, humanity. That's why we love him, not just because he looks amazing in a helmet, not just because he can carry a baby alien and make us cry, but because when we watch Pedro Pascal on screen, we feel something real. He earned it, every single frame. This is Pedro Pascal, and his story, it's only getting better.